Sir, open the door. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the thin walls of a quiet suburban home just after 6:02 a.m., the kind of hour when the world is supposed to still be gentle, when coffee hasn't even finished brewing and children are still wrapped in dreams. But not today, not for Daniel Brooks, who stood barefoot on cold hardwood floors, one hand resting protectively on his 8-year-old daughter's shoulder as she peeked out from behind him with wide, confused eyes. "Daddy, what's happening?" she whispered, and Daniel didn't answer right away because he already knew, not how it would end, but how it would begin, with misunderstanding, with judgment, with a story told too quickly by people who never stayed long enough to hear the truth. He opened the door slowly, not defensive, not afraid, just steady. And there they were, 2 officers, calm but firm, presence heavy with purpose. "Daniel Brooks," one of them said, glancing at a tablet. "We need you to come with us." Pause, just enough for dignity to settle in the silence. "You've been accused of misconduct involving a corporate executive last night." The words hung in the air like something foreign, something misplaced. His daughter's fingers tightened around his shirt. "That's not true," she said quickly, voice trembling. But Daniel gently placed his hand over hers, grounding her, not correcting her, just reminding her that truth doesn't need to shout. "It's okay," he said softly, more to her than anyone else. Then he looked at the officers. "Can I get her to school first?" One officer hesitated, the other shook his head slightly. "Procedure over empathy." "We need to go now, sir." Daniel nodded once. No resistance, no argument, just acceptance of a moment he didn't choose. Fluorescent light from the hallway stretched across the floor, catching dust in the air like suspended time, and in that stillness, something quiet and unbreakable stood inside him, because 12 hours earlier, under neon bar lights and the hum of late-night traffic, Daniel had done what he always did, what no one notices until it matters. He had stepped in when no one else did. He had seen a woman, unsteady, alone, her voice barely above a whisper as she tried to wave off a situation that didn't feel right. "I'm fine," she had insisted, but her steps said otherwise. Her eyes said otherwise, and Daniel, a man who had learned long ago the difference between words and truth, didn't ask for permission to be kind. He simply stayed, creating space, not claiming it. "Let me call you a ride," he had offered, calm, respectful, and when she didn't respond clearly, when the night blurred her judgment, he made a choice rooted not in opportunity, but in responsibility. He got her home, safely, quietly, without witness, without expectation, and he left before the sun even thought about rising. No number exchanged, no name demanded, just a door closed gently behind him, and a world that would wake up without ever knowing what had almost happened. But now, standing in his doorway with handcuffs waiting just beyond politeness, Daniel understood something most people never do. That doing the right thing doesn't always come with immediate clarity. Sometimes it comes with consequence first, explanation later, and as he stepped outside, cool morning air brushing against his face, his daughter's voice calling after him, small but fierce. He didn't do anything wrong. The street stayed quiet, neighbors unaware, the sky pale with early light, and somewhere, miles away, a woman was waking up, piecing together a night she couldn't fully remember, holding on to fragments, fear filling the gaps, and in that fragile space between memory and assumption, a single decision had already been made, one that would nearly destroy a man who had never once asked to be seen as anything more than decent. And for now, the truth waited, patient, quiet. Just like him, the station smelled faintly of stale coffee and floor polish as Daniel sat quietly in a metal chair, his hands resting calmly on the table, not clenched, not shaking, just still, like a man who had learned long ago that panic never clarifies truth. "You understand the accusation, right?" the officer across from him asked, flipping through a thin digital file, his tone not cruel, just procedural. "Yes," Daniel replied, voice low and steady. "I understand what is being said." A pause settled between them, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. "Then tell me your side," the officer continued, leaning back slightly. Daniel did not rush. He did not defend himself with desperation. He simply spoke. She was unsteady, alone, and people were watching but not helping. He said, eyes fixed not on the officer but somewhere quieter, somewhere internal. So you took her home? The officer pressed. I made sure she got home safely, Daniel corrected gently. And something in that difference lingered longer than expected. Across town, behind glass walls and filtered sunlight, Victoria Hale stood barefoot in her penthouse, one hand pressed lightly against the marble counter as she tried to piece together the night before, her head still heavy. Not with pain but with absence. Fragments flickered, music too loud, a room too crowded, voices she did not trust. And then a blur. A man, quiet, steady, unfamiliar. Who was he? She murmured to herself, her assistant standing nearby with a tablet already open. We are pulling security footage now, the assistant said carefully. But there is a report filed this morning based on your statement. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. I said I felt unsafe, she replied, her voice controlled. Precise? You also said you woke up in a place you did not remember getting to. The assistant added, choosing each word with caution. Victoria exhaled slowly. Her world was built on control, on clarity, on knowing exactly where every step would land. And this gap in memory, this uncertainty, it unsettled her in a way few things ever had. Then we proceed, she said firmly, not out of anger, but out of instinct, because in her world, hesitation often cost more than action. Back at the station, the officer tapped his pen lightly against the table, studying Daniel for a moment longer than routine required. Why did you not call the police? He asked. Daniel's eyes lifted slightly, not defensive, just honest. Because sometimes people do not need more attention, he said. They just need to get home. The officer leaned forward. And you expected nothing in return? Daniel met his gaze, calm, unwavering. Respect does not come with a receipt, he answered, the words simple. But they carried weight, the kind that does not demand belief, only patience. Outside, the morning had fully arrived, sunlight stretching across sidewalks, neighbors stepping into ordinary routines unaware of the quiet fracture unfolding between two lives. One built on quiet dignity, the other on structured power, and somewhere between them, the truth waited, not hidden, not lost, just unseen for now. Because sometimes the loudest accusations arrive before the quietest truths are given the chance to speak. And in that still room, with nothing but the hum of electricity and the rhythm of breath, something began to shift, not yet visible, not yet understood, but steady, like the first sign of a storm that does not destroy, only reveals. You said you saw her clearly. The voice came from the doorway, calm but precise, and both officers turned as a second figure stepped into the room, a senior investigator with a tablet in hand, his expression unreadable. We have preliminary footage from outside the building, he continued, placing the device gently on the table, not as an accusation, but as an offering of perspective. Daniel did not lean forward. He did not reach for it. He simply waited, because truth, when it arrives, does not need to be chased. The screen flickered to life, grainy black and white, timestamp just after midnight, a sidewalk washed in dim streetlight, and there she was, Victoria, her steps uneven, her posture uncertain, a few figures passing by, glancing, not stopping. Then Daniel entered the frame, not rushing, not dramatic, just present. He paused a few feet away, giving space, speaking briefly. No audio, only movement. She waved something off. He did not leave. Instead, he adjusted his position, subtly placing himself between her and a shadow that lingered too long at the edge of the frame. 3 quick exchanges, 2 slower movements, and then a shift. The shadow moved away. Daniel stayed, steady, patient. And when Victoria nearly lost her balance, he did not grab, he did not pull, he simply steadied her at the elbow. Minimal contact, respectful distance, the kind of control that does not announce itself. The officer beside the screen leaned in slightly. Play that again, he said quietly. The room slowed, breaths measured, eyes focused. The same sequence unfolded, but this time, the detail spoke louder than the assumption. Daniel guiding, not leading, protecting, not claiming, and then the final frame, him stepping back, opening a car door, waiting until she was seated, closing it gently, and walking away without looking back. No hesitation, no lingering, just exit. Silence filled the room, Not heavy, not forced, just present, like something settling into place. The investigator glanced at Daniel. "You did not stay," he said. Daniel shook his head once. "She was home." He replied simply. Across town, Victoria stood in front of a larger screen now, the same footage playing in higher resolution, her assistant beside her, silent for once. The room around them felt different, less certain, more human. Victoria watched closely, not as a CEO reviewing a report, but as a woman searching for truth inside fragments of a night she could not fully remember. "Pause it there," she said, pointing to the moment Daniel stepped between her and the shadow. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in realization. "Who is that other man?" she asked. Her assistant tapped quickly. "We are still identifying him." Victoria did not respond immediately. She just kept watching, again and again. The same quiet actions, the same absence of intent, the same restraint, and something unfamiliar began to press against her certainty. Not guilt, not yet, but doubt. The kind that does not break you, only asks you to look again. Back at the station, the officer exhaled slowly, setting the tablet down. "This changes things," he admitted, not loudly, not dramatically, just truthfully. Daniel remained still, his hands resting where they had always been, because he had never needed the room to believe him immediately. He only needed it to be willing to see. And in that moment, as the hum of the lights softened and the weight of assumption began to lift, the story shifted, not with noise, not with argument, but with something quieter, something stronger, the kind of truth that does not fight to be heard. It simply waits until the room is ready to listen. "Run it one more time," Victoria said, her voice quieter now, not commanding, not sharp, just searching, and the screen obeyed. The same grainy footage unfolding again in slow motion. Daniel stepping into frame with that same unhurried presence, not trying to be noticed, not trying to impress, just there. And this time she saw something she had missed before. The way he kept his distance even when she leaned toward him, the way his hands never lingered, the way he looked around not for attention, but for safety. 3 short exchanges, 2 still moments, and then that shift again, the shadow in the background stepping back, leaving, because sometimes presence alone is enough to change what could have happened. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the table, not in anger, but in recognition. "He never once tried to take advantage," her assistant said softly. "Careful not to overstep." Victoria did not answer immediately. She just watched the final seconds, Daniel opening the car door, stepping back, waiting, and then leaving without turning around. No hesitation, no claim, just quiet exit. The room fell into a kind of stillness that did not belong to boardrooms or negotiations. It belonged to something more personal, something harder to control. "Get me everything on him," she said finally, her voice steady again, but different now, less certain, more aware. Across town, Daniel remained seated as the officers stepped outside briefly, their voices low, no longer accusatory, no longer confident in the version of events they had walked in with. The door closed, leaving him alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet rhythm of his own breathing. He did not shift in his seat, did not pace, did not rehearse explanations, because he had already said what mattered, and in that stillness, dignity did what it always does. It held its ground without asking to be seen. A few minutes later, the door opened again. The senior investigator stepped back in, his posture different now, less rigid, more measured. "Mr. Brooks," he began, pausing just enough to choose his words carefully. "The situation is evolving." Daniel looked up, not hopeful, not bitter, just present. "There is additional footage that supports your account," the investigator continued, setting the tablet down again. "Not as evidence this time, but as acknowledgement. We are going to need to verify a few more details, but for now, you are not being charged." A silence followed, not dramatic, not celebratory, just real. Daniel nodded once, the same way he had nodded at every turn, accepting each moment as it came. "Thank you," he said simply, not because he had been given something, but because the truth had been allowed to breathe. Outside, the morning had fully settled into day, cars passing, people moving, life continuing as if nothing had nearly been broken, and yet somewhere between those ordinary sounds, a shift had already begun. Back in the glass-walled office, Victoria stood still as a new file appeared on the screen. Daniel Brooks. Age 42. Single father. No record. Former service background. Steady employment. Community references. The kind of file that does not draw attention. The kind of life that does not ask for recognition. She read each line slowly, not as a CEO scanning for risk, but as someone realizing she had almost rewritten a man's life based on a moment she did not fully understand. Her reflection stared back at her from the screen, composed, powerful, and for the first time that morning, uncertain. "Schedule a meeting," she said quietly. Her assistant hesitated. With him, Victoria clarified, her voice soft but firm. "In person." And as the room fell silent once more, it was no longer the silence of control, but the silence of something deeper, something beginning to take shape. Because sometimes the truth does not arrive to accuse, it arrives to ask a single, difficult question. "What will you do now that you finally see it?" "You are free to go, Mr. Brooks," the investigator said, stepping aside just enough to clear the path. And Daniel rose without urgency, without relief spilling across his face. Just a quiet nod, because freedom, when it is delayed, does not always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like balance being restored, nothing more. He stepped out into the daylight, the sun higher now, casting long, clean shadows across the pavement. And for a brief moment he paused, breathing in air that felt no different than before, yet carried a weight that had shifted. His phone buzzed in his pocket. 3 missed calls from the school, 1 from an unknown number, and a message from his neighbor saying his daughter had been picked up and was safe. Daniel exhaled softly, not in panic, not in fear, just in acknowledgement. He had always trusted that things would hold together as long as he did. Across the city, inside a building of glass and quiet authority, Victoria stood at the edge of her office, watching people move below like pieces in a system she had mastered for years. But today, something in that order felt incomplete. "He has been released," her assistant said gently from behind her, placing a tablet on the desk. "No charges filed at this time." Victoria did not turn right away, her reflection faint in the window, composed as always, but her eyes, just slightly different. "Set the meeting," she said, her voice lower now, less about control, more about intention. "He may not agree to come," the assistant added carefully. Victoria nodded once. "Then I will go to him." The words landed without force, but they carried something unfamiliar, something closer to accountability than authority. Back outside, Daniel walked the 2 blocks toward his truck, the same old pickup that had carried him through years of quiet effort. Its paint worn, its engine reliable, nothing flashy, nothing demanding attention. Just like him, he opened the door, paused for a moment, then closed it again, choosing instead to sit on the hood, the metal warm beneath the morning sun. Because sometimes movement is not what is needed. Sometimes stillness is. He looked down at his hands, steady, unchanged, the same hands that had worked, carried, fixed, and protected without asking for recognition. And for a brief moment, the noise of the morning faded, replaced by something quieter, something that did not come from outside, but from within. The understanding that dignity is not proven in moments of praise, but in moments of doubt, when no one is ready to believe you, and yet you remain the same. A car slowed as it approached, then stopped a few feet away, sleek, polished, unmistakably. Out of place against the worn edges of the street. Daniel did not move immediately. He simply watched as the engine cut off and the door opened. Victoria stepped out, not in the sharp confidence of a boardroom entrance, but with something more measured, more human. She closed the door gently, took a few steps forward, then stopped, leaving space between them, not out of distance, but out of respect. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice steady but quieter than it had ever been in any room that answered to her. Daniel slid off the hood slowly, standing upright, not defensive, not welcoming, just present. "You should not have been taken in this morning," she continued, choosing each word with care, not because she lacked them, but because for the first time, she understood their weight. Daniel met her gaze, calm as ever. "It is not the first time someone misunderstood something they did not see fully," he replied, his tone even, without edge, without accusation, and that, more than anything, made the moment heavier, because grace, when it is offered without demand, does not release tension, it deepens it. The street around them remained quiet. No audience, no noise, just two lives intersecting in a moment that neither of them had planned. And for the first time since the night before, the silence between them was no longer filled with assumption, but with something else entirely, something waiting to be named. "You came yourself," Daniel said, not as a question, but as a quiet observation, his voice steady, his posture unchanged, and Victoria gave a small nod, not the kind used in boardrooms to signal agreement, but the kind that admits something unspoken. "I thought it was necessary," she replied, her eyes meeting his fully now. No distance, no glass, just presence. The morning air moved gently between them, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic and something else, something softer, like the moment before words choose their direction. "What you saw this morning," she continued, "was a result of my assumption." The word landed carefully, not deflecting, not excusing, just owning. Daniel did not respond immediately. He simply listened, because some truths need space before they can be understood. "I woke up without clarity," Victoria said, her voice measured, "and I filled the silence with fear." She paused, her gaze lowering briefly, then returning. "And fear, when it is given authority, can do damage." A stillness followed, not heavy, but honest. Daniel's eyes softened slightly, not in forgiveness, not yet, but in recognition. "It happens," he said quietly. And that was all. No lecture, no correction, just acknowledgement, which somehow carried more weight than any accusation could have. Victoria exhaled slowly, as if something she had been holding without realizing it was finally allowed to settle. "You protected me," she said, not as a compliment, but as a fact she had come to accept. Daniel shook his head once, gently. "I did what anyone should have done," he replied, and that, more than anything, made her pause, because in her world, not everyone did, not without expectation, not without calculation. The difference between what should be and what is had always been clear to her. But now, standing here, it felt closer, more personal. "Not everyone would have," she said softly. Daniel glanced briefly down the street, then back at her. "That does not change what is right," he answered, his voice calm, grounded in something that did not shift with circumstance. A car passed slowly behind her, the sound fading as quickly as it came, leaving the space between them undisturbed. Victoria took a step forward, then stopped again, careful not to close the distance too quickly. "I cannot undo what happened this morning," she said, her tone steady but quieter now, "but I can make sure it is corrected." Daniel studied her for a moment, not judging, not weighing, just seeing. "Correction is not always about statements," he said. "Sometimes it is about what comes after." The words settled gently, but they carried direction, not instruction. Victoria nodded, understanding more than he had said, because in that moment, this was no longer about clearing a record. It was about restoring something less visible, something that had been placed under question without cause. "Then let me start there," she replied, her voice holding a kind of resolve that did not need to be announced, just acted upon. The silence returned, but this time it felt different, not uncertain, not unresolved, but open, like a door that had been closed too quickly and was now, slowly, being held again. And as they stood there, no longer separated by assumption or distance, the shift that had begun quietly hours before continued, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the kind of steady clarity that does not force change, it allows it. And in that space, something rare took shape. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of something built on truth instead of fear. And for the first time since the night before, both of them understood that what happened next would matter far more than what had already passed. "Then come with me," Victoria said, the words leaving her more gently than she expected. Not as a command, not as a test, but as an invitation that carried weight beyond convenience. Daniel did not answer immediately, his eyes steady, measuring not her status, not her car, but her intent, the kind that cannot be rehearsed, only revealed in still moments like this. "Where?" he asked simply. Victoria glanced back at her car, then at him again. "To your daughter's school," she replied, and something shifted again, quiet but real, because this was no longer about clearing a misunderstanding between two adults. This was about stepping into the Space where consequences had already reached someone who had no part in the mistake. Daniel studied her for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. Not agreement, not trust, but willingness. They drove in silence, not awkward, not forced, just present. The city moving around them in its usual rhythm, traffic lights changing, people crossing streets, unaware that inside this car, two lives were adjusting their course in ways neither had expected. Victoria kept her hands steady on the wheel, her posture composed, but her thoughts no longer arranged in the clear lines she was used to. She glanced once at Daniel, who sat quietly beside her, looking out the window, not withdrawn, just grounded, the kind of calm that does not need to fill space with words. "How old is she?" Victoria asked after a moment, her voice softer now. Daniel turned slightly. 8. He replied, and something in the way he said it carried more than a number. It carried years of quiet mornings, packed lunches, and promises kept without witness. Victoria nodded, absorbing that, not responding with anything polished, just understanding. The car slowed as they approached the school, a modest building with children's voices echoing faintly from the playground, a sound that did not belong to boardrooms or decisions worth millions, but to something simpler, something honest. Daniel stepped out first, Victoria following a second later, keeping a respectful distance as they walked toward the entrance. A few parents glanced up, curious but not concerned, the world still unaware of how close it had come to misunderstanding something important. Inside, the front office was calm, fluorescent lights humming softly above neatly stacked folders, and a receptionist who looked up with a polite smile that quickly shifted into recognition. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone warm but edged with concern. "We were trying to reach you." Daniel nodded, stepping forward. "I know," he replied, his voice steady. "Is she okay?" The receptionist hesitated briefly, glancing toward the hallway. "She is in the counselor's office," she said gently. She was a little shaken this morning. Daniel closed his eyes for just a second, not in frustration, not in anger, but in that quiet place where responsibility meets reality. Then he opened them again, steady as before. "Thank you," he said, turning toward the hallway. Victoria remained near the front desk, not following immediately, understanding that some spaces are not hers to enter uninvited. But she watched, not as an outsider, but as someone beginning to understand the reach of a single decision. Daniel walked down the hallway, each step measured, not rushed, because he knew what mattered was not how quickly he arrived, but how he arrived. Calm, present, steady, he reached the door, paused for just a moment, then knocked softly. "You can come in." A gentle voice answered from inside, and as he opened the door, the light from the hallway fell across the room, revealing a small figure sitting in a chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes lifting the moment she saw him. And in that instant, the entire weight of the morning shifted again, not with noise, not with explanation, but with something far more powerful, recognition. Because sometimes the truth does not need to be proven, it only needs to be seen by the one person who already believes it without question. "Daddy," she said, her voice small but certain, and Daniel stepped into the room with that same quiet steadiness, lowering himself just enough to meet her at eye level, not rushing, not overwhelming, just present. "I am right here," he replied softly, and her shoulders dropped in a way that only trust can cause. The school counselor sat nearby, watching with a gentle understanding, but said nothing, because some moments are not meant to be guided, only witnessed. "They said you were in trouble," the little girl continued, her fingers twisting slightly in her sleeves. Daniel shook his head once, calm and reassuring. "Sometimes people do not have the full story," he said, his voice even, "but the truth always finds its way." She studied his face for a second longer, searching not for answers, but for consistency, and when she found it, she nodded, as if that was enough, because for her, it always had been, outside in the hallway. Victoria stood still, her hand resting lightly against the wall, not out of weakness, but out of grounding, the faint sound of that single word, "Daddy," echoing softly in her mind, not loud, not dramatic, just real. She had built her life on precision, on decisions made with clarity and speed. But this was different. This was the part no report ever shows. The part where consequences ripple into places no one intended to touch. She looked down briefly, then back toward the closed door. And, for the first time, the weight she felt was not about control, but about understanding. Inside the room, Daniel stood again, offering his hand. Ready to go back to class? He asked gently. His daughter hesitated for just a moment, then nodded, slipping her hand into his, the movement simple, but filled with something steady and unspoken. As they walked toward the door, it opened slowly from the outside, Victoria stepping back instinctively to give space, her eyes meeting the child's for a brief second. And in that moment, something shifted again. The little girl tilted her head slightly, curious but not afraid. "Are you the lady from last night?" she asked, her voice innocent, unfiltered. Victoria paused, not expecting the question, not prepared with an answer shaped by strategy, just a moment of truth. "Yes," she said quietly, kneeling slightly to match the child's height. "I am." The girl looked at her for a second longer, then said something that did not belong to judgment or doubt. "He helped you," she said simply, and the words landed with more clarity than any footage, any report, any explanation ever could. Victoria felt something shift deep within her, not sharp, not overwhelming, but undeniable. Because sometimes the clearest truth comes from the smallest voice. Daniel remained still, watching, not interrupting, not guiding, just allowing the moment to exist. The girl gave a small nod, as if confirming something she had already known, then turned back toward her classroom, her hand still in her father's, steady, certain. Victoria rose slowly, her eyes lifting to meet Daniel's again, and this time there was no distance, no assumption, only understanding, the kind that does not come from evidence alone, but from seeing what truly matters. And as the hallway returned to its quiet rhythm, the noise of the morning faded completely, leaving behind something far more powerful, a truth that no longer needed to prove itself, because it had already been seen, clearly, simply. And without doubt, Victoria stood there a moment longer after the child disappeared into the classroom, the quiet hum of the hallway settling around them like something sacred, something that did not need to be spoken over. She exhaled slowly, not as a release of tension, but as an acceptance of truth fully formed. "I was wrong," she said, her voice steady but no longer shielded by authority. Daniel did not react immediately. He simply looked at her, not with judgment, not with relief, just with the same calm presence that had carried him through every moment before this one. "Yes," he replied gently, not to accuse, but to confirm what no longer needed defense. The word hung in the air, simple, unembellished. And for the first time in a long time, Victoria did not try to reshape it, did not soften it, did not redirect it. She let it remain exactly as it was, because truth, when accepted, does not require negotiation. "I am going to correct everything publicly," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet clarity. "Every report, every statement, every assumption that was made." Daniel nodded once, acknowledging, but not leaning into it. "That matters," he said, "but not as much as what you choose to carry forward." She met his gaze, understanding now that this was not about repairing an image. It was about restoring something deeper, something that had been placed at risk without cause. "Then I will carry it differently," she said, and there was no performance in it, no calculated tone, just a decision shaped by something she had not allowed herself to feel before. Humility. The word did not need to be spoken. It was already present. The hallway lights flickered slightly as someone passed. At the far end, the world continuing in its ordinary rhythm, unaware of the quiet shift that had just taken place. Daniel glanced briefly toward the classroom door, then back at Victoria. "She will be fine," he said softly, not just about his daughter, but about everything that had almost been shaken. Victoria followed his gaze for a moment, then returned it. "Because of you," she replied, and this time, he did not deflect it. He simply accepted the acknowledgement without letting it define him. Because dignity does not grow from recognition. It exists long before it. A few seconds passed in silence. Not uncomfortable, not unfinished, just complete. Victoria took a small step back, giving space again, but not retreating. "If there is anything I can do," she began, then paused, realizing that the sentence itself did not fit the moment. Not anymore. She adjusted, choosing something simpler, something more honest. "Thank you." Daniel inclined his head slightly, a quiet gesture, not dismissive, not inviting more, just enough, because gratitude, like truth, does not need to be extended beyond its natural form. She turned then, walking back toward her car, her steps measured, not hurried, carrying something different than when she had arrived, something lighter, but also more grounded. Daniel watched for a moment, then turned toward the exit, the sunlight outside steady and unchanged, and as he stepped into it, there was no sense of triumph, no need for validation, just a quiet continuation of the life he had always lived, one built on choices no one applauded, on actions no one saw, until the moment they finally did. And somewhere between the noise of assumption and the silence of truth, one thing had become clear: dignity does not need to defend itself, it only needs to endure long enough for the world to recognize it. And when it does, the loudest reaction is not applause, it is silence.